Recording. All right. Well, good evening and welcome to tonight's program, Maine Won't Wait, How Maine is Taking Action on Climate Change with Dr. Cassaundra Rose, Maine Climate Council Coordinator. I am Brenda Harrington, Program Librarian at the Belfast Free Library, and I want to thank you all for joining us. The Belfast Free Library is pleased to once again co-sponsor the fall and winter series of evening programs with the Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition. Before I turn the mic over to Tom King, board member at the Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition, for updates and to introduce tonight's speaker, I want to mention that this program is also part of the All of Belfast Climate Dialogues, a project of the Belfast Free Library, which was created to help all residents in our area talk about climate change and its impacts in order to increase awareness and help us all prepare for the challenges ahead. To accomplish this, we have created a new website with lots of educational resources and a place where one can easily share their climate change observations, concerns, and hopes in words or pictures. I invite you to go to our website, belfastlibrary.org, and follow the link to all of Belfast Climate Dialogues to learn how to participate and to learn about upcoming programs around climate change. Our next program will be on Thursday, November 4th, with the program about an introduction to the warming sea, a symphony about climate change, composed by Lucas Richmond, the music director of Bangor Symphony Orchestra. And to register for that Zoom link, go to our website. So now on to tonight. During tonight's presentation, please keep your mics muted, and we ask that you put your questions in the chat, and I will get to them after the presentation. I want to remind you all that tonight's program is being recorded and will be available on the library's YouTube channel. With that, I thank you again all for joining us, and I will turn the mic over to Tom King. Tom.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Brenda, and the Belfast Free Library for co-sponsoring this program with the Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition. Before we get to the program, I just want to mention a few things that BBWC has coming up here in the next month and in the next year. The first thing is the Sunset Walk on Sears Island, which is going to be November 20th at 3 p.m. and it'll be limited to 10 people. So if you want to do it, please call and look on our website to call the number. I could give it to you now, but it's easy. Well, it's 338-1147, but it's easier to look on our website and make reservations if you want to go. Please dress appropriately. And remember that we will have birding on the footbridge on November 13th from 8:30 to 10:30 with Ron, Harold, and Gary Galisi. And dress appropriately again, please. And bring your binoculars. Ron and Gary will have their spotting scopes there. And if you want to know anything about birds, these two guys are the guys you want to ask because they're really good at birding. And so it's a great opportunity to do some birding. Just want to make mention that the Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition is in the process of putting together a 2022 stewards program, something we haven't done in a couple of years because of COVID. The board is meeting. We have a committee that is working on it, and stay tuned for more information about it. Okay. And now we're going to be entertained by Cassaundra, who comes to I got some notes here. I got to find Cassaundra so I can get it all right. But she grew up in a warm climate. She told me she grew up in Florida and in California, but she's here in Maine because she has a husband that's from Maine, and she bundles up and handles the Maine winters. But she is, the senior scientist and analyst of the Climate Council coordinator for the governor's office. That would be Governor Mills right now, Office of Policy of Innovation and the Future. So She's had more than 15 years of research and policy making communications with, geology and climate change. So with that, I'll turn this over to Sandra, and she's going to give us an update on what's going on and fill us full of information about why Maine can't wait.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction, Brenda and Tom, and thank you everybody for spending a little bit of your evening with me and for inviting me here to speak to you this evening. I have a lot of content to go over, and I hope to give you a lot of great information about how the state of Maine is tackling climate change and what our new state climate action plan is, and I'm happy to take questions at the end. So we'll be taking a journey in a few parts this evening, beginning with this overview of how the state of Maine has started down the path of climate action. Next, I plan to cover how climate change impacts Maine and what we should be planning for. What exactly are we expecting to change? Then we'll quickly explore what the State Climate Action Plan Maine Won't Wait recommends to tackle and prepare for climate change. And finally, we'll arrive at how this plan is now being put into action. So when Governor Mills came to office in January 2019, she made tackling climate change a top priority for her administration. And she's taken bold action in her first 2 years to support renewable energy and energy efficiency, promoting electric vehicles, reducing hydrofluorocarbons or super greenhouse gases, among many, many other climate-related actions. Under her leadership, we've also joined an organization called the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is a bipartisan coalition of 25 U.S. states and territories that are committed to meeting the Paris Climate Agreement goals. And that was done in Governor Mills' first year in office. And Governor Mills tasked my office, which is the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future, or GOPIF for short, with helping to lead, coordinate, and support the efforts of the state to tackle this major issue. And we have a fantastic team that I'm really lucky to work with to work on supporting the Maine Climate Council and climate action for the state of Maine. So also in 2019, the legislature passed a piece of legislation called LD 1679, which was signed into law by Governor Mills, which set ambitious climate change action goals into law and created the Maine Climate Council to develop strategies to achieve those goals. And this is a little different from how some other states have tackled mandating climate action by executive order or state agency rulemaking. Our goals are actually in law. So those goals are first to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, our gross greenhouse gas emissions, or just what we're putting into the atmosphere, nothing that we're burying. And we need to reduce those emissions by 45% below 1990 levels by 2030, and at least 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. We track these emissions over time, and they're reported every 2 years by Maine's Department of Environmental Protection. Another law passed in that legislative session required that our energy mix, our generation, hit certain renewable generation goals over time as well. And in addition to this law, Governor Mills signed an executive order requiring that the state achieve carbon neutrality by 2045, which means anything we're putting into the atmosphere emissions-wise, we're also burying or sequestering from the atmosphere in our natural and working lands and waters. The climate plan must also work towards supporting resilience in Maine people, communities, and industries, ensuring that Maine's climate response, our policies and programs, are equitable, and that it fosters economic opportunity and prosperity. Lastly, the law requires that this is not just a one-time plan, but that the plan be updated every 4 years, beginning December 1st of last year and being updated every 4 years after that. So it's exciting. It's a plan that needs to live and breathe and be updated over time. So where do Maine's greenhouse gas emissions coming from? You may have heard of greenhouse gases and the greenhouse gas effect, and essentially these gases trap heat in our atmosphere, and they warm. And the more that they are in the more of them that there are in the atmosphere, the warmer that Earth becomes. So in the state of Maine, most of our greenhouse gas emissions come from the transportation and building heating sectors alone, which is a little bit unusual when we compare Maine with other states in the US. It's followed by commercial, industrial, and electric power generation sectors. And knowing where our emissions come from really helps the state climate plan prioritize action in different sectors. So as I mentioned before, Maine's DEP tracks greenhouse gas emissions and reports on them every 2 years, with the most recent data available up to 2017. So the graph I'm showing you here shows historical emissions from 1990 to 2017. And Maine's emissions in the past were between 20 and 27 million metric tons. So kind of sounds like a big number. It's smaller compared to other states, but it's still a decent chunk of emissions. And our emissions reached a high point around 2002. Since then, they've come down to 17.5 million metric tons, mostly due to changes in our switching from more polluting fossil fuels towards natural gas, as well as some changes in our industrial sectors becoming more efficient. So Maine law, as I mentioned before, has a few requirements, though, for reducing our emissions over time. And so it requires that we hit at least a 10% reduction by 2020, 45% by 2030, and 80% by 2050, as I mentioned before. And the Climate Council was made responsible for coming up with strategies to achieve these goals over time, to help the state plan for reaching these goals. So who is the Maine Climate Council? Well, this is a diverse assembly of 39 volunteers, including scientists, industry leaders, bipartisan local and state officials, and further. And actually, one of those Climate Council members is on this call. I won't call them out, but hello. So the council and its 6 working groups and 2 subcommittees altogether, all told, include more than 250 Maine volunteers with a diverse set of experiences and backgrounds who worked over 15 months to develop the state climate action plan. The Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, which I was privileged to work very closely with, was responsible for identifying the impacts of climate change in Maine. And the 6 working groups researched and recommended strategies to the council for achieving Maine's climate goals in areas like transportation, buildings, energy, coastal marine areas, natural and working lands and waters, community resilience, public health, and emergency management. Maine has one of the largest climate councils in the nation, if anybody was wondering. And as part of the new climate action plan that was passed last year, we also created a new equity subcommittee that will support the planning and implementation of climate strategies to ensure that the benefits of climate action reach across diverse populations of Maine people. So in addition to the work of these many working groups and subcommittees over time, the climate work of the council was informed by several scientific and technical analyses. The STS, or Scientific and Technical Subcommittee of the Climate Council, was charged with providing a summary of the impacts of climate change in Maine, as well as some specific projections of future changes, like estimates of relative sea level rise, temperatures, precipitation, and so on. My office engaged an expert consultant to provide economic analysis and greenhouse gas modeling of the draft strategies as well, to see how much emissions bang for our buck we could get with each strategy. In addition, they produced vulnerability maps to some of the major impacts of climate change, as well as a cost of doing nothing, or a cost to the state from climate change with current policies. We worked with the University of Maine's Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions to assess the recommendations of the 6 working groups from an equity perspective as well. which was very, very helpful to improving the final plan and also helped inform the creation of the equity subcommittee. The Governor's Energy Office and my office also released a plan together to identify pathways and strategies for the advancement of Maine's clean energy economy. So there is a lot of detail and fantastic research and data that went into the development of the Climate Action Plan, and there's much more than I could cover today. However, all of these are available for free download and reading at climatecouncil.maine.gov, and I highly encourage anybody who's interested in more detail to take a look. So what was the timeline? The Climate Council had a very ambitious timeline to develop Maine's first climate action plan. So the council, STS, and working groups met monthly and sometimes even more frequently between October 2019 and June 2020 to characterize the impacts of climate change in Maine and to suggest strategies to reduce our emissions and adapt to those impacts. They all produced reports to inform the 39 members of the Climate Council. And once they made the recommendations to the council, the members considered the strategies in the context of those 4 reports that I mentioned on just the last slide to select the final strategy and refine the final strategies that went into the climate action plan. So going forward, after the climate plan was finished on December 1st, 2020, the Climate Council and working groups and STS are meeting at least twice per year and quarterly to monitor the implementation of the climate action plan. So they have this very strong role of not only suggesting strategies, but really helping to monitor implementation and provide advice on the implementation of those strategies by the state. So in the next few years, after the implementation phase, we'll begin the process again and work towards an update of the climate action plan in 2024. So I thought it would be helpful, rather than just kind of talking about the process and then launching into the strategies, to also cover a little bit of the findings of how climate change has been impacting Maine already and what we expect from climate change into the future. This was a really important part of the development of the Climate Action Plan. It's been a very science and data driven process together with policy and stakeholder engagement. And so I thought we could talk a little bit about, what are those impacts that we should be planning for today? All of the work that I'm talking about today was compiled by the Maine Climate Council's Scientific and Technical Subcommittee in their scientific assessment of climate change and its effects in Maine. I was privileged to work closely with this group, as I mentioned, and it's a really great body of work that I recommend to anybody who loves to geek out on the details. So from increasing land and ocean temperatures to rising sea levels, more frequent severe storms, shorter winters and disrupted agricultural seasons, and more public health risks, climate change is already a reality for Maine. As a climate scientist, I like to fit this a little bit of science in my presentations. So I'm going to start off with a high-level summary of what those impacts are that we're seeing, and then talk a little bit about the future. So while temperatures globally have increased about 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree centigrade, Maine's land temperatures have increased even more than that, about 3.2 degrees Fahrenheit since 1895, with our coastal areas warming a little bit more than the interior of the state. Of all the seasons, winters in Maine have warmed the most, which has caused our agricultural growing season to increase by about 2 weeks, and earlier lake iceouts and snowpack melt in the spring. Warming temperatures bring both potential benefits from longer growing seasons and lower heating costs, but also potential damages from heat stress to workers, crops, and livestock, as well as greater cooling costs. Now, this is a really great visualization of how that warming has looked like from 1895 until today in Maine. It's called Warming Stripes. The URL, Show Your Stripes, is at the bottom. It's a really fantastic tool. And it just kind of visualizes over time what the changes have been. We can really see very quickly from this that Maine's climate has gone from a much cooler time to, on average, much more warm. And we can see that the warmer years are becoming much more frequent than cooler years. We can look at that in a little bit of a different way and looking at the growth in temperature over time. So this is annual average temperatures from 1895 to 2020. And we can see that trend of, it's really getting warmer over time. So this is just a different way of looking at those data, temperatures, looking at temperature anomalies from 1895 until 2020, getting warmer in Maine over time. So when we think about climate change in the future, really the amount of warming is going to depend entirely on humanity's ability to curb greenhouse gas emissions. So shown on this slide are the historical data that we just showed you in a couple of different ways, but also 3 future scenarios based on used in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 5th assessment report. And so these show the scenarios where if we achieve carbon neutrality or net zero greenhouse gas emissions, I believe by 2050, we'll stay at a more moderate warming scenario, won't warm quite as much. However, there are different scenarios used in climate modeling to predict what the future warming is if emissions don't come down as quickly. And so the the green and the red lines show what happens with higher scenarios of greenhouse gas emissions. So it's clear from climate change modeling that, which is the science of which is quite amazing and has really gotten very sophisticated and great. And these models make it clear that with higher emissions, the risk to Maine is higher. And so Maine may warm by an additional 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit by 2050 and up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit by 2100, depending on our success in curbing greenhouse gas emissions. And so taking the context of how greenhouse gas emissions are rising globally really helps us plan for those impacts of climate change in our state climate plan. And so as I'll talk about in a few slides, what Maine's contribution to those emissions is really important to bringing keeping this entire amount of warming to moderate levels. So there are a number of risks with rising heat in Maine. So as temperatures rise, very hot, or they're called high heat index days, will correspondingly increase. The map on the right comes from our vulnerability analysis done for the climate plan, and it shows the current heat vulnerability by climate zone throughout the state, with our coastal zone being a little bit warmer, so showing higher heat vulnerability than the central and interior zones. So high heat index days are expected to be 2 to 4 times more frequent by the 2050s, causing both direct and indirect costs to rise. So those direct costs to Maine, you might think of that as lost work time or heat illness. Those direct costs are expected to rise 9 to 14 times higher by 2050 and be 13 to 26 times higher by 2100. So the cost to Maine from more frequent high heat index days is quite substantial. Warming is also causing Maine to become wetter overall, with statewide annual precipitation, which is our rainfall and our snowfall together, increasing by 6 inches since 1895. So we've already seen it become substantially wetter, and we expect that to continue into the future. So with greater warming and a changing warming climate, also comes more unpredictable rainfall and snowfall, with both short-term droughts and more frequent severe storms potentially striking without much warning. The weather data so far that we've observed in recent decades has allowed us to observe that heavy storms of 2 or 4 inches of precipitation are becoming more frequent, which increases the probability of floods that will erode infrastructure and degrade water quality in wells and public water sources, ponds, lakes, streams, rivers, and coastal areas. The picture on the right was taken in July of this year after 3 to 5 inches of rain. I'm sorry, last year, after 3 to 5 inches of rain fell in the area in 24 hours. And I think I don't have to remind anybody that we've had a very wet summer with at least 3 or 4 very high rainfall storms on the coast of Maine this summer. I've had my first rain gauge in my garden this summer, and I've definitely observed 3 to 6 inches of rain multiple times myself. So we can definitely see these changes happening pretty quickly. So part of the cost of doing nothing analysis for the climate plan also looked at the impacts of both sea level rise and increased river flooding throughout the state. How and whether Maine streams and rivers might flood more in the future is not currently clear in climate science. It's a little bit complicated, the relationship between flooding and precipitation. So I'll focus a little bit more on sea level rise today. Maine sea levels have risen about 8 inches since the early 1900s, and about half of the last century's sea level rise in Maine has occurred since the early 1990s. So this mirrors global observations of accelerating sea level rise. Sea level rise is happening a little bit faster over time. And so as Maine's relative sea level rises, coastal communities and ecosystems will see increased frequency of nuisance flooding, inundation of coastal lowlands with saltwater erosion, and the loss of dry beaches, sand dunes, and other habitats. The picture on the right here on the slide was taken last November by my colleague in Portland on Franklin Street, when king tide flooding, or just sunny day flooding, inundated the street by rising up through storm drains from Casco Bay. And based on scientific projections, the Maine Climate Council recommended that the state commit to manage for 1.5 feet of relative sea level rise by 2050 and 4 feet by 2100. But maybe consider preparing to manage for 3 feet by 2050 and 8.8 feet by 2100 for very critical, very high risk infrastructure. A foot of sea level rise in the future, just to give it a little bit of context, is expected to lead to about 15-time increase in the frequency of nuisance or sunny day flooding, according to the scientific assessment. So the map on the right here is a map looking at both the social vulnerability of zip codes along the coast of Maine and how socially vulnerable communities might be affected by sea level rise. So the map on the right shows the percentage of land loss to sea level rise and social vulnerability together, with both social vulnerability and sea level rise increasing in darker shades. So the darker, a little bit darker it gets, the more socially vulnerable communities are being impacted. Several areas in the Penobscot Bay area, several zip codes in the Penobscot Bay region are being expected to be affected by sea level rise. This scenario here is 1.6 feet above the 20th century average. But as we look forward to slightly higher levels of sea level rise, going from 1.5 feet to now 4 feet, we can see that more zip codes are getting darker. So more zip codes will be affected by sea level rise and storm surge under higher future climate scenarios. And this is a concern because socially vulnerable communities may have fewer resources to respond and defend against climate change impacts like sea level rise. This last scenario shows 8.8 feet, which is either 4 feet of sea level rise with a big storm surge or a more extreme sea level rise scenario in the future. And you can see some down east communities are extremely highly affected by sea level rise in this scenario. So the Climate Council also got commission analyses to try to quantify what the socioeconomic impacts of sea level rise and flooding will be as well. And so those analyses found that the potential statewide annual GDP loss with 1.5 feet and 4 feet of sea level rise ranges from $118 million to $665 million per year. As sea levels rise, scientists expect that we may lose 42 to 75% of our dry beach area along the coast. And that loss of dry beaches will more than likely impact tourist visits as well. So the number of tourists lost in different scenarios ranges from about 1 to 6 million per year, with associated loss of spending over time. So really this is a lot of data and information that I've thrown at you, but I think really thinking about this and stepping back a little bit, thinking about the total amount of sea level rise and the speed at which it happens will play a big role in how easily we can adapt to these impacts, and what ultimately the economic and social and ecological costs will be. So knowing what these potential losses are has really helped the climate plan and the Climate Council to weigh the costs of taking action today and to make recommendations. Oh, excuse me. So I've just covered a few impacts, but I think it's clear from looking at all this information that we expect climate change to affect all sectors of Maine's economy, from tourism, agriculture, and forestry to transportation and trade. Warmer temperatures, more rain, and sea level rise will increase the incidence of flooding and damaged property and infrastructure, and also shift the natural ranges of Maine's plant and animal species and habitats. The cost of doing nothing analysis modeled all of these impacts, and they're available on the Climate Council website for reading and reference for anybody who is interested. There's a lot more detail than I was able to include today, so highly recommend looking into that. Okay, so taking a pause, I'm going to shift gears back into thinking about, we know, taking all of this into account, what then does the state climate action plan propose to do in response to the expected climate change impacts and the amount of emissions reductions that we need to do? So on December 1st of last year, the Climate Council released the State Climate Action Plan, Maine Won't Wait. The plan established 8 strategies to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and increase resilience across Maine communities. And this focused on opportunities in clean transportation, buildings, and jobs, by investing in community climate planning infrastructure and the conservation of natural working lands and waters, and by engaging all Maine people in creating our collective climate resilient future. The first 3 strategies, A through C in the plan, really focus on tackling emissions in our biggest greenhouse gas emissions source sectors: transportations, buildings, and energy and industries. The remaining 5 strategies, ones listed on the right here, are more focused on helping Maine people and environments prepare for climate change, become more resilient, grow our clean energy economy, and engage and educate about climate change, science, and jobs. I'll be talking about just a few of these latter strategies in more detail this meeting, and we'll share how they're being put into action. If you have any questions about any of the other strategies, I'm happy to talk about them during the Q&A session at the end. Please just let me know. And all of the updates that I'm going to be talking about today draw from the recent Maine Climate Council meeting on September 29th. And we have an associated short report listing these updates available on our website at maine.gov/future. So I will drop a link into the chat after I'm done chatting with you in the Q&A so that you can find that information later. So I wanted to start with strategy E, which focuses on protecting Maine's environment and working lands and waters. So we recognize that Maine's natural resources are unique and irreplaceable. They provide valuable benefits from improving resilience to climate impacts such as carbon sequestration. The plan, the Maine Won't Wait, recommends that 30% of Maine's lands and waters be conserved or protected by 2030, including the protection of working farmland and forest land to keep it working, biodiverse habitats, and coastal ecosystems. Related to the recommendation, this recommendation is a further step of collecting and coordinating more data to help guide decision making. So really providing information to help make good decisions over time, including enhanced climate-related monitoring of land and ocean environments, coordinating climate change research that meets the needs of communities and decision makers, and making it easier to access climate data. So the state of Maine is putting Maine Won't Wait into action through several avenues, including actions that state agencies can take with current rules and laws, allocations in the biennial state budget, passing new laws, and through investments in Governor Mills's Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan, which invests federal funds to help Maine recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. So in Strategy E, under the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan, several investments are helping to address not only pandemic recovery, but climate resilience as well, including $50 million for innovation in heritage industries like fishing and forestry and agriculture, and $3 million to upgrade culverts at stream crossings, including improving flood resilience and aquatic habitat passage. In the biennial budget, the legislature allocated $40 million for the Land for Maine's Future program, which will allow the state to make substantial progress on that 30 by 30 conservation goal that I mentioned in the last slide. The legislature also passed significant new legislation this session, including bills supporting programs for healthy soils, soil carbon storage, and mapping coastal habitats such as eelgrass and salt marshes. So in addition to funding, the state has launched several stakeholder processes like the Forest Carbon Task Force, which is recommending strategies for small to medium-sized woodlot owners to utilize their land for long-term storage of carbon, as well as an agricultural siting stakeholder group. The state is also better quantifying the potential for carbon burial in state lands and waters by supporting forest and coastal ecosystems mapping in eelgrass, grass, and salt marsh habitats. This mapping really will help support our ability to put a number to how much carbon is being stored away from the atmosphere in these environments over time, and also helps us track how climate change might be affecting their ability to store carbon. So a lot going on with Strategy E and implementing that. The next strategy, couple of strategies I'll go over very quickly and then tell you what the updates are there. Strategy F recommends that Maine invest in building healthy and resilient communities, providing state support for communities to be proactive about understanding, planning, and acting to reduce their risk from climate change. This includes risk from physical hazards such as sea level rise, as well as from health hazards like exposure to pollution and to heat. This strategy also strongly recommended adopting official sea level rise projections for the state, informed by the scientific assessment of climate impacts in Maine by the STS that we discussed earlier. Those projections, just to remind you, are 1.5 feet of sea level rise by 2050 and planned for 4 feet by 2100. Strategy G recommends investing in climate-ready infrastructure to better adapt to climate change, like making sure we understand the vulnerability of statewide assets like transportation infrastructure, culverts, drinking water systems, stormwater management, and much more. This ensures that both our communities and sensitive habitats are able to adapt to climate shifts and impacts from sea level rise and changing precipitation patterns. So quite a few different updates to cover here. The first is that my office, along with the Department of Transportation, are leading the development of two programs that address the last two strategies from Maine Won't Wait: the Maine Municipal and Tribal Partnership Program, actual name pending, and the Infrastructure Adaptation Fund Pilot Program. So the Maine Municipal and Tribal Partnership Program, again, actual program name may vary, will provide direction and grants in support of municipal, tribal, and regional climate projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and make communities more resilient to the impacts of climate change. This program is structured to offer a low barrier to entry and reward communities both for aligning with Maine Won't Wait and for higher levels of effort. This program learns from and builds on GOPIF's Community Resilience Pilot Project. That pilot leveraged regional service providers and implementation funding for municipal and regional climate adaptation planning and action. The program extends the pilot's focus on regional capacity building and community engagement that are really critical for supporting municipal climate action. This new program will be adding assistance for climate mitigation, so clean energy, electrification, and energy efficiency, making this a one-stop shop for community climate action. So we anticipate launching the Municipal and Tribal Partnership in December. The Infrastructure Adaptation Fund pilot will take $20 million from the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan allocation to support local, regional, and state projects addressing adaptation and climate resilient infrastructure improvements, as well as identifying critical infrastructure at risk. This program is also in development, and we don't have an exact timeline on when that will be launching, but we expect that it will be in the next few months. So those are two really great opportunities coming up for the implementing the last two climate plan strategies. In addition, LD 1572, a new law passed this last legislative session, directs the Maine DEP and several other state agencies to conduct a review to incorporate consideration of those sea level rise projections from the Maine Climate Council into state rules and recommend state changes to state statutes to legislature last year. So there are a number of important next steps. The DEP is hiring new staff to help lead this process, and an interagency review of statutes and rules. And they will be making recommendations to the legislature in January of next year. Public feedback in that process, I know, is extremely valuable. And so I would recommend following the DEP's rulemaking process for more updates on that. And we'll be sharing that in our newsletter when we hear the updates as well. So lastly, I wanted to mention very briefly that the Maine Center for Disease Control received some new funding from the US CDC to implement a number of climate and public health programs. My office is partnering with them to support some of these programs. We're really excited about this in particular. I think it's a great opportunity to leverage some of their existing environmental health tracking work and building on the work that Maine Won't Wait to identify some of the climate public health impacts that we expect. So they'll be supporting some programs and some planning around extreme temperatures, particularly partnering with 2 to 3 counties on extreme temperature response planning and developing an extreme temperature community resilience guidebook. Partnering with DEP to establish a pollen stakeholder group and establish a pollen monitoring network throughout the state, and also working on some capacity building to help support the public and communities in accessing data for climate-related public health decisions. So there's a very long list of new legislation that passed this last session that relates to implementing Maine won't wait. I'm not going to go through this. It is on our website, but we're really excited by the progress that happened this last session. So my office, as you probably gathered, is really busy at work tracking the great deal of progress that has been made this last year on implementing the climate plan, which you can learn more about by visiting climatecouncil.maine.gov or my office's Maine Climate Council web pages. And I'll drop the link to those in the chat in just a moment. We'll be celebrating 1 year of Maine Won't Wait on December 1st with a more full picture of all the implementation updates from this year and some exciting announcements and program launches. So I hope you'll join that event virtually to learn more. And with that, I want to thank you very much for your attention. I know I just covered a lot of information and very happy to answer questions. Please visit our website for much more information and I would recommend signing up for our biweekly newsletter and following us on social media, where we provide frequent updates about the climate plan and climate related events, resources, and articles. So with that, I'm very happy to take your questions and thank you again for listening.
All right, thank you so much, Cassaundra. We have one question in the chat that I'll read to you. Climate Council, or I don't know what that means, GOPIF.
GOPIF,
Done
that's
as
my office.
follow up on page 105 of Maine Won't Wait. Are you reading that? Are you following me?
Yeah, I'd be happy to read that. And hi, Peter. I've chatted with Peter about this many times. So Peter's asking about follow up on a recommendation to monitor federal policy to impose a price on carbon. And so there is a piece of legislation that has been introduced at the federal level to put a price on carbon. And there's been a bit of modeling and study showing that federal national level carbon pricing may be a very effective tool to help bring down emissions over time. Peter, I would say that we are monitoring this. We are engaging through the U.S. Climate Alliance in monitoring, as well as discussions around some more regional, I would say, carbon markets as opposed to carbon pricing. So I'm afraid I don't have a very substantial update, but I know that it is something that we're absolutely paying attention to and trying to monitor over time.
Okay, thank you. I sorry, I couldn't read the question because I didn't understand it. So here's a question from Gina Marianne. Will we be looking at air pollution beyond the spoken about pollen and industrial pollution?
Yeah, that's a great question. So air quality and the impacts on air quality with climate change were absolutely something that the Maine Climate Council considered and made recommendations around in the climate plan. Some of those recommendations are around trying to have to fill some gaps in air quality monitoring that we have right now that make it a little bit harder to monitor what changes are actually happening over time so that we can better understand how climate change might affect them. There are also other recommendations around trying to ensure that that more climate friendly, I'd say, heating solutions are also not negatively affecting air quality. And so burning wood or biofuels, these are things that the public health subgroup actually looked into and looked into some other state programs as great examples of how you can encourage more climate friendly alternatives that also improve air quality. So The equity subcommittee, lastly, I'll mention, is also thinking quite a bit about how we can make sure that that with moving towards cleaner energy, energy and transportation technologies, how that can be targeted to benefit communities that might be more disproportionately affected by air pollution today. That, for example, communities that are located near industrial facilities or maybe near major transportation corridors that have a little bit more air pollution from the burning of fossil fuels and combustion vehicles. So I would say the Climate Council really has been thinking about this on many fronts. And it's absolutely a big public health issue that the entire council and working groups are really concerned with. So fantastic question.
All right, great, thank you. We have another one that just came in. Has this project surveyed municipalities in Maine to determine their greatest needs with regards to implementing this plan? With over 700 towns in Maine, this information might help direct your plan.
Yeah, great question, Erin. We engaged a lot with municipalities throughout the entire process. We had municipal representation on every single working group and the Climate Council, and talked with the Maine Municipal Association about needs, gaps. We also did an analysis looking at the capacity of different towns and regions to for planning. So in the cost of doing nothing analysis, there's a map of what the regional planning or the town level planning capacity is, whether there's a town planner on staff, if there's somebody on staff who does planning support part-time, whether a town is actually has to rely on a regional planning organization or an outside provider for their planning needs. As we move forward, though, especially with the municipal and tribal partnership program, we expect to continue collecting information and trying to update that over time. And I think as we receive information from towns who want to participate in the program, that'll also help us get a good picture over time. Excuse me. So we absolutely want to make sure that we're using the actual capacity of towns to help guide where resources are going and what the needs are.
Okay, thank you. Well, there isn't another question in the chat. I could ask if there's another question out there, please unmute yourself and ask it, or go ahead and type it in the chat. While we're waiting, I actually have a question related to the last question. Was so if a small town or municipality would like to be involved and get some funding for some of the mitigation or preparations for the future, is there going to be like an application process, or how is that going to work for small towns?
Yes, I'm not directly involved in the program development for that, but my colleagues are. So yes, there will be an application process opening. We expect that to come, if not December 1st, very early December. And so all of the information will be shared through the climate plan website. And so there will be an FAQ about how that process will work, exactly what information or actions are needed. And I will say funding will be provided not only for the planning process, but the implementation, like putting actions into process, because a lot of the feedback we heard was that funding and support is needed for both pieces, because so many small municipalities or tribes don't have that funding or resources for that planning phase to get to the implementation phase.
Great, thank you. Okay, anybody else have a question? Oh, I see one in the chat. Jean and Marianne ask, $3 million seems like a small number for culvert work.
I believe that funding is primarily, well, it's building on some existing funding, so it's an expansion of the existing program there. I'm actually not sure what the number, if we have an estimated number for the need there. I think that would be great, and if you'd like to send me an email, I can see if I can find that number for you if you're interested. I am going to drop in the chat a couple of the links that I mentioned just to make sure that everybody can find all those great resources that I've talked about during the meeting today. The second link in particular is the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future website. We have a number of climate meeting pages, and we list all the reports on that page. So that's a great place to check for upcoming meetings and to sign up for our newsletter.
Yeah, it is very resourceful and helpful. I've explored those web pages myself.
Glad that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Erin has a question. Is there a vision for education and outreach on a state level, or is the intention that those efforts will be more local?
Yeah, that's a great question, Erin. One of the strategies I didn't cover was the last one, which is all about education, outreach, and informing Maine people and engaging them. And so my office is working on launching a new communications effort at the state level around Maine Won't Wait and the various resources that are available to people and municipalities and businesses. So we're expecting to do that early December. That being said, there's actually a lot of education and outreach going on at a lot of levels, from the local level, talking to towns, to regional and statewide, not only by the state, but by a lot of partners as well, from businesses to nonprofits. On the education side, the Department of Education is in the process of developing and releasing a number of climate change related K-12 education resources for teachers, like a resource database of freely accessible curricula, activities. They're working on some online asynchronous education modules that teachers can use with their students. And they're also going to be doing some stakeholder engagement, so really going out and talking to teachers, education groups about some of the challenges in teaching climate education and what the needs are. They're doing a number of different things. I'm really excited to be helping support them a little bit with that. But I think there's definitely more coming on climate education.
That's great to know. Thank you. On the December 1st, when you say it's the first year anniversary, is there going to be a special program, or can people Zoom into your meeting, or what's happening?
Absolutely. Yes, we're going to have, there's a Maine Climate Council meeting planned for that day. There will be a small report of updates released with that plan. The GoPIF website and our newsletter are great places to follow along, where we'll be sharing more details about what the program will be for that day, coming very soon. I won't be sharing a lot of details here, but I'm very excited about it, and I hope you'll all be able to tune into a little bit.
Great, I will. Let's see, I'm going to remove the spotlight so we can see people. Gallery. Does anybody else have a question? No? Well, thank you so much, Cassaundra. That was a lot of information, a lot of good information, and thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate you having me in your series. And it was great to speak with you all. And thank you as well for taking climate action at the local level. We're so excited to see all the work that's been going on at the local level around the state. So thank you as well.
Thank you. All right.